So first of all, I want to thank Rabbi GLICK. I know he's a busy, Baruch Hashem, busy speaker, and he made time for us tonight. So we're very, very, very grateful. And also thank you to your wife. We get to listen, and it's all thanks to her. I know how that is. And we are so thrilled and excited to have you yet again, even on Zoom. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
I don't know if we hear you the loudest, but we do hear you.
But you can hear me. Okay, well, my voice will probably pick up as I talk. So, all right. So the topic is, does the Torah excite you, right? Is that what, was that the wording? Yes, does the Torah excite you? Find out what it really is, and it will. So I'm hoping over the next few minutes to help us discover what Torah really is, as a result of which there should be no lack of clarity about whether Torah should excite us and why. And hopefully it should begin to excite us if it hasn't so far, and it should, and if it has, which is amazing, it should excite us even more. Unless, of course, you're already familiar with everything I'm going to say, which is possible, which is even better, I guess. Not better for you necessarily, but well, it is better for you. Anyways, so does the Torah excite you? What it ultimately boils down to is, what is the Torah to us? First of all, what is the Torah? Okay. The reason Torah will or will not excite us is because of what Torah means to us, right? So depending on the way we perceive Torah, that is going to determine whether or not Torah excites us, whether or not we're excited by Torah. If our perception is accurate, then ultimately the thing that's determining whether or not we're excited by Torah is what Torah is. Now, if we accept that Torah is something worth being excited about, then the thing that remains is for us to really get in touch and in tune with what Torah really is. And once that happens, we should become excited by it. So we can't change what Torah is, and we don't need to change what Torah is, and we wouldn't want to change what Torah is. But what we can do is upgrade our awareness of what it is that is the identity of Torah. As our awareness gets upgraded, our perception of what Torah is will be upgraded, and therefore our appreciation for it will be increased, and we will start to get as excited about it as we should be, which is very, very much. So the question ultimately is, what is Torah? And there are a couple of other things I want to get to. I want to introduce by way of questions. These are questions that, the Rebbe asks in Sichos, and the Rebbe doesn't necessarily connect it with the way that I'm going to be presenting and explaining what Torah is. But the general theme is the same. And these are questions that the Rebbe asks in a number of places. They're asked in a number of places throughout Chassidus. You may have, be familiar with these questions. Well, one of them is not so much a question. One of them is just sort of a clarification. The other one's an actual question. And there are two things going back to Rosh Chodesh Sivan, right? Sunday was Rosh Chodesh Sivan. Now, there are two very interesting things we know that happen on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. One is that it says in the Torah that on Rosh Chodesh Sivan we arrived at Har Sinai, right? We arrived at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, at the beginning of the month, a few days before the Torah was going to be given. And how does the Torah describe, what words does the Torah use to describe our encampment, the fact that we camped there? It says, Vayichan Sham Yisroel neged Har. And the Jews camped there, adjacent to the mountain, let's say. But the Jews is a loose translation. If we translate precisely, it says Vayichan, which is a singular verb, because in Lashon HaKodesh in Hebrew, the verb changes for singular and plural. So what it should seemingly have said is Vayachanu, and they camped. Who camped? Yisroel. It should have said Vayachanu Sham B'nei Yisroel. And the Jews, Vayachanu, they camped. It doesn't say that. It says Vayichan, and he camped. And there were like 2 million people there. That's like 1,999,999 too many people to say he. So something doesn't seem right. And obviously the Torah, it's since coming to Crown Heights and being here for so long, I'm naturally inclined to being very particular about grammar. I'm slowly learning to be okay with people using their vocabulary and grammar very, very, very loosely, because that's about as good as you're going to get in Crown Heights. So I'm learning to deal with it. But that's not Torah. Torah speaks very carefully, and Torah says exactly what it means, and it means exactly what it says. If Torah uses a singular verb, and he camped, that's what it meant. But there are 2 million people, so why does it say that? So Rashi says, simple answer. When we arrived at Har Sinai, at Mount Sinai, we were Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad. We were so united as one, Ke'ish Echad, as one person, B'Lev Echad, with one heart. The degree to which all 2 million of us were united was so intense that the Torah actually describes us with a singular verb, and he camped. Because we were effectively one collective unit. That was the degree of unity. Imagine, right? There's a story about the Jew who was lost. He was on a shipwreck, and he was the only one who survived, and he was on this island, and he was lost there for years and years. He's living alone on an island, making do, figuring things out, and slowly he, figures out what it's safe to eat, and he manages to build himself a place to live and keep out of the rain, etc. And 10 years later, finally, he sees a ship passing by, or maybe here's a plane, whatever it is, and he makes a very smoky fire. He puts tons of wet leaves on, so the fire says a bunch of smoke, and they actually see the smoke, and they come and they save him. And it's like he'd given up a long time ago. His excitement was out of the world. And they figured, they see he has this building. They ask him for a tour. Let's see how you survived here for 10 years by yourself. This is amazing. We thought you were for sure dead. He says, come, let me show you around. And he shows them the fire pit, and he shows them all the different things he made. And he's walking them around, and he says, this structure here, this is my house, my little hut that I built. He built it completely by hand for himself. And then they notice there are 2 more buildings. And they ask him, you're one guy. Why do you need 3 buildings? He says, okay, so the first one I showed you already. That's my house. That's where I live. The second building I built as a shul. That's where I go to daven. He said, okay, 1 man, 1 house, 1 shul. What's the third building? He said, that's the shul I would never step foot into. Right? So you only need 1 Jew to have 2 different shuls. To have 2 million Jews and to be able to say it was Ke'ish Echad B'Lev Echad is difficult to imagine, let's just say. And that's maybe being optimistic. It's being complimentary to say it's difficult to imagine. So what was going on? How is it that all of a sudden, usually 2 million Jews means like 8 million opinions. Here there were 2 million Jews and it was only like 1 person. That's how united we were. So we're going to have to get to explain the how and why of that. Another thing about Rosh Chodesh that's very curious is if you look at the Torah, you won't necessarily see it so clearly in the Psukim, but Rashi explains, and it comes from Gemara, that on each day of Sivan, on the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th day of Sivan, there were different things that we did every day to prepare for the giving of the Torah, which makes sense. This is like the most momentous occasion since the creation of planet Earth. We're going to prepare. But on the first day, the day that we arrived, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, Rashi says, Moshe didn't give them any instructions. There were no preparations on the first day. Why? So it says, the words that are used are chulsha de urcha, literally the weakness of the journey. They just arrived, they were tired. Give them a break, let them settle down, have a cold drink, put their feet up, relax, get a massage. They've been traveling for 7 weeks. Tomorrow we'll start preparing. Which maybe kind of makes sense, but also not that much. Because, we're counting Sphira now, we're counting Sphira So'emer. Obviously, the literal reason we count Sphira So'emer is because Hashem said so. It's literally a mitzvah in the Torah. It says, Osfartem lachem, and you shall count for yourselves, Mimachras Shabbos, from the second day of Pesach, Sheva Shabbosos Tmimos is 7 complete weeks, and then it will be Shavuos. And interestingly, that's actually technically the halachic definition of Shavuos. It's the only Yom Tov that doesn't have a date on the calendar that's determined by Torah. Every other Yom Tov, Pesach, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, they all have a date. 15th of Nisan, 1st of Tishrei, 10th of Tishrei, 15th of Tishrei. The one Yom Tov that doesn't actually have a date is Shavuos. The date of Shavuos is the 50th day from the second day of Pesach. Now, nowadays, it always ends up on the 6th day of Shavuos, but in the time of the Beis HaMikdash, when the Rosh Chodesh Iyar and Rosh Chodesh Sivan could have been either, on the 30th day or the 31st day, depending on when someone saw the moon, it could be on the 5th, 6th, or 7th of Shavuos. So the counting of the Omer Sphira is a mitzvah, and it's an important mitzvah. It's the mitzvah that determines when Shavuos is. But in addition to that, there's another layer to another aspect to Sphira, and that is there's a medrash that says that, Moshe took us out of Egypt, we had Yetzias Mitzrayim, and we said, okay, cool, like what now? Where are we going? What's up? What's the plan? So Moshe says, we're going to travel for 7 weeks, we're going to arrive at Har Sinai, and Hashem's going to give us the Torah. And we were like, really awesome, that's super exciting, let's start counting down the days. Let's draw up a calendar, 7 weeks, 49 days, let's start crossing off the days. So we count the days now from Yetzias Mitzrayim, from the beginning of Pesach until Shavuos, to commemorate the fact that they chose to count down those days because they were so excited. Now think about it, 7 weeks out, they had 7 weeks of travel through the desert ahead of them, including splitting the sea and etc. They had a whole lot to go ahead of them, but still, with all that ahead of them, they were so excited that they started counting down the days. Just imagine how excited they were when they were like right there. They've been traveling, and 6 weeks ago, when they had 6 weeks of travel through the desert ahead of them, they were already so excited they were counting down the days. We arrived here now, we're at Har Sinai, we can see it right in front of us. Just imagine how excited they were. So it makes sense. We're like, nah, let's relax, let's chill. We don't have energy for this. Imagine how much the adrenaline was pumping. Imagine how excited they were. It doesn't make sense that they wanted time out. If they've been counting down all the way since back then, imagine there's something you're super excited. I don't know, maybe it's, this isn't so relevant today. I mean, it's still relevant. It's not as much as it was, I remember, 30 years ago. Because travel is much more accessible today. Travel overseas is way cheaper than it was 30 years ago. It's much more accessible. But 30 years ago, if you had a really close friend or a relative who traveled overseas, people didn't just come and go the way we do today. Well, not today because of coronavirus, but 2019 and hopefully very soon again in Yitz Hashem. People travel, we travel. You go on orbits, you find the cheapest thing, you swipe your credit card. 30 years ago, travel was a much bigger deal. We had planes, I'm not that old, but it was a big deal. It wasn't so accessible. And when someone traveled far away and they were coming back, it was really exciting. Maybe I'm also over dramatizing it in my memory because I'm thinking as a young child. It's obviously everything's more dramatic, but it was pretty exciting. And when you heard that someone was coming from overseas, it was like really exciting, and you're counting down the days. And just imagine, that you're super excited. Your dearest, closest friend who you share everything with, the most important person in the world to you. Maybe it's your spouse, your closest friend, whatever it is. And they've been overseas for a year. And 11 months ago, WhatsApp crashed and there's no Facebook Messenger. You haven't been able to FaceTime. You haven't been able to WhatsApp, nothing for 11 months. And you know that in a month they're coming home. You're going to be pretty excited. Super excited. Now imagine when it's like the night before they're coming home. There's one sleep left until you go to the airport to pick them up. It's like, good luck falling asleep. Right? And then you get up in the morning and you're on the way to the airport, and you get to the airport and you pull up to the airport. You think you're going to pull up to the airport and you're going to be like, I'm a bit tired. I'm going to go relax. I'm going to go pull over in the parking lot and just relax for a bit and go get a massage and whatever. When they come out, they'll just wait for me. I don't think so. Right? You're not going to be able to relax if you try. You're going to be so pumped. So how is it that after all this time of counting down and traveling, we're there? We see Har Sinai right in front of us. It's like, boom, we arrived in our face. Yeah, we need a break. We need to chill. Sorry, we're not ready to start working yet. We're not ready to start preparing. There's going to be more to it than that. When Moshe Rabbeinu didn't give them any preparation because of the weakness of the journey, there's going to be something else that he's referring to when he says the weakness of the journey. And we're going to get to that. And both of these things are going to be resolved as soon as we understand what Torah is and why it's so exciting. So I'm going to ask a question that, depending on what you think of it, some people's responses to this can be a little bit controversial, but if I was to ask, do you think that the Torah is an analogy, is a metaphor? What would you answer? You can get some nods or some answers in the chat, or you can answer verbally if you don't mind being in the recording. Is the Torah an analogy? Is the whole Torah an analogy? The entire Torah, would you say the entire Torah is an analogy? No, I'm getting lots of no's. That's what I was expecting. I'm going to rephrase that question, at which point the answer becomes a definitive no. If I would have asked, is the entire Torah just an analogy? Then the answer is absolutely no. But I deliberately didn't ask if the entire Torah is just an analogy. I asked if the entire Torah is an analogy. And there's actually a pasuk in Nevi'im that refers to Torah. It says, Ka'asher yomar mashal hakadmoni. And mashal hakadmoni refers to Torah. As mashal hakadmoni, mashal means an analogy. As the mashal hakadmoni, kadmoni, probably the best translation is primordial, which means original, the first thing ever to exist, right? It comes from the word kodam, means before or prior. Kadmoin means the original, utmost original, i.e. primordial, the first one ever to exist. Mashal hakadmoni could be translated two ways. It could be the primordial analogy, the mashal, which is kadmoni, or the way, and there are different Nevi'im, different Mefarshim who explain it a bit differently, but Rashi says it means the mashal, the analogy of the kadmoni shel olam, the primordial one of all existence, i.e. the creator. The creator was there before all the things that he created by definition, because he created them, he was there before he did so. So Hashem is kadmoni shel olam, the primordial one of all existence. So the Torah itself, the Navi refers to Torah as Mashal HaKadmoni. Torah is the primordial mashal, the mashal of the primordial one. It's a mashal for Hashem. What does that mean? Torah is a mashal for Hashem. Right, so the answer is the entire Torah a mashal? Is yes. Is it just a mashal? No. Everything in Torah is also literally true, but in addition to being literally true, it's also a mashal for Hashem. But what does that mean? What does it mean that Torah is an analogy for Hashem? It's actually quite simple, and it's going to make a lot of sense once we just clarify what a mashal, what an analogy is. What's the function of an analogy? When do you use an analogy? And how and why do you use it? And what's its function, right? I know that I use them a lot. I teach a lot. I teach a lot of Chassidus. I teach a lot of abstract ideas, which are sort of difficult to grasp. So analogies and metaphors can be very, very helpful. Why are they helpful? If you're trying to explain something to someone and they don't understand it, is it helpful to just talk about something else instead? No, it's not helpful to talk about something else instead. But if you can take an idea that's just a little bit too abstract for the person you're talking to really grasp, to really get a grip on, and you take another idea that's tangible and that they relate to and that they have a relationship with and that they can really connect with and think about and understand, and you can find a way to illustrate the idea that you're trying to explain through this thing that the person relates to, which is exactly what an analogy is, then the fact that you're using the analogy, you're illustrating and communicating using something that the person relates to and has a relationship with, which means they feel comfortable. They feel comfortable to think about it, to think about the details because they really get it. And if you can show the parallel between the thing that they relate to and then explain how that is also true of the thing that they couldn't relate to, that the analogy, that thing acts as a stepping stone. And it's like, oh, okay, now I get it. Why? Because if you have something that's vague and abstract, or just something that a person doesn't relate to at all and doesn't really have a grip on, it's hard to explain it and for them to figure it out and work their way around it. If the whole thing is vague and abstract to them, they just don't relate to it. They don't get it. So the point of an analogy is you take an idea that someone relates to, has a connection with, they can understand. Then you take the idea that's abstract or that they don't relate to, that you want to communicate, and there's no way for them to get this. It's too slippery for them. But you place it inside the idea that they do relate to. The idea that they understand and relate to, the mashal, gives them a way to hold on to it, because now they can grasp the mashal, and the mashal has the nimshal inside. The analogy contains within it, or is a way to get access to, the thing which they couldn't access directly, but because you gave it to them in the form of something that they can access, they were able to access that thing, and then that gave them the ability to then get access to the thing they couldn't access directly. You know, and because this is the function of a mashal, of an analogy, a metaphor, is to take the idea that you want to communicate and to dress it up in something that the person really relates to. In an ideal situation, you'd give a different analogy to different students, right? If you, obviously, practically, this is not always possible, but, you know, let's say that I'm trying to explain an idea to my 7-year-old daughter and my 4-year-old son and my 3-year-old daughter. And they all don't get it. It's like, whoa, way above their heads. And I want to use a mashal for them. If I have the time to explain it to each one, I'm going to use a different mashal for each one. You know, for my son, I might use a truck or a car as an analogy. And for my 3-year-old daughter, I probably try to use food. She loves food. You know, and for my 7-year-old daughter, I'd maybe talk about, like, you know, princess clothes or something like that. Right? And if I use a truck mashal for my daughter, she'll get it. She'll understand. She understands what a truck is. But my son has like a really strong connection to trucks. And like when I communicate it by means of a truck, like boom, he's going to be locked on and focused, and he's going to be paying attention. He's going to really get the idea quickly. And my daughter's going to be like a half spaced out because I'm talking about a truck. But if I talk about a princess or a dress or makeup, or maybe cooking a recipe, like boom, she's going to be focused. She's going to relate, and she's going to end up getting the idea. And the 3-year-old, honestly, is probably going to space out even if I talk about food. But, right? So because the point of the mashal is to make the inaccessible idea accessible to the person by means of dressing it up inside of something that's accessible to them, different things are more accessible to different people. So the ideal mashal for each person is going to be a bit different. The thing that we relate to the most strongly, the thing that we connect with, have the strongest relationship to, we understand the most clearly. You know, there was a little bit, maybe a bit of an oversimplification, but let's say you have people same age, same maturity level, but one person like has a very mathematical way of thinking, seeing things, and one person has a very artistic and creative way of seeing things. So for the person who's creative and artistic, they're going to connect to an idea if you communicate it by means of something creative and artistic. And if you communicate it by means of something mathematical, and they're just not a mathematical person, it's not to say that all creative artistic people aren't mathematical, but some are not. But the person who's creative and artistic and not mathematical, you communicate it by means of math. For them, math is hard enough to relate to as it is. Don't use that, something that's already hard for me to really relate to and understand, to communicate something else to me. It's like now I need a third mashal, a second mashal to get to the first mashal, to get to the idea. And the same is for the other person. If you have someone who's just like loves math and that's the way they think and see everything, and like that, to them, like creativity and art is just like fluff, and it's just like I don't relate to that at all. Same thing. You start trying to communicate an idea to them through something creative and artistic, they're just going to be like, I don't get that. Like, stop. You communicate it through something mathematical and they'll really get it, right? Because the function of a mashal is you're trying to communicate something that's beyond their grasp. They can't quite get it. Either it's too deep, it's too difficult, it's too abstract, it's too intangible, whatever it is. If you can dress it up in something that the person can really get a grip on, and you can really integrate it effectively, which is what a good mashal will do. The ideal mashal is something that the person can really understand and relate to and connect with. And also you can really integrate the nimshal, the idea that you want to explain, into it effectively. If you can do both of those things, you'll have a good chance of the person getting the idea as a result of the mashal. Right? So if we want to summarize that, the function of a mashal, of an analogy, is to allow someone to be able to grasp and access something that they can't grasp and access directly, because you've put it into something that they can grasp and access. So, yeah, this mashal's like a little bit ridiculous, but it's also very effective. It's just a little bit more tangible, because for mashalim now, we're still talking about ideas and it's still a little bit abstract. So I want to bring it down to something that's like real, legit, tangible. It's a little bit weird. Maybe for some of you it is, for some of you it's not. It's not weird for me, but I know I always get some sort of funny faces when I use this mashal. But, you know, if, let's say that someone is preparing chicken to eat, and this person is trying to cut down on their saturated fat intake, and so they're trying to peel the skin off the chicken before they bake it. It'll reduce the fat content somewhat, especially if it's the legs of the chicken, the dark chicken. It's like super slippery. It's really hard. You try to pull the skin off the chicken, the whole thing's just slipping, slides out of your hands. It's like, good luck with that. And I learned this really good trick from my mother. If you take a napkin, a serviette, a paper towel, and you hold the skin with the napkin, you grab the skin with a napkin or a serviette or a paper towel, the napkin absorbs all the moisture and really sticks to the skin. Boom, you can pull it off in half a second. So you can't really grab the skin. It's slippery. You try to grab, you pull it, just keeps slipping out of your hand. It's like you can't grasp it. But if you take something that you can grasp, and that thing can grasp the skin, boom, you got it. Done. So I'm getting some nods here. This is like nice. I'm not feeling like this is like a really strange mashal for a change. So, and it's not just because you're ladies. I've used this for groups of ladies before and I get some very strange looks. So thank you for making me feel comfortable with the use of this mashal. So the function of a mashal is to, if you have something that you want to give to someone, but they can't grasp it, you dress it up inside of something that they can grasp, and then they grasp that thing, and by means of that, they can get to the thing that's inside of it. Now, obviously, with the real mashal, it's a lot more complex and nuanced than grabbing the skin with a napkin, because there you just need to grab it. Here you need to grab it and then actually get the point and understand it. Fine. But that's a very oversimplification, but that's the idea. It's a means of giving someone the ability to grasp something that they can't grasp directly. Now, this, I'm going to ask a question now. I guess if you don't want to be in the recording, I'll ask if anyone wants to jump in and make a suggestion. You're welcome to. If not, I'll dive into it. But why is it that, you can also respond in the chat, why is it that we can't understand Hashem? Right? It says, we say in Pasach Eliyah, Leis machshava tvisa bach klal. No thought, no machshava, no mind can grasp Hashem. Why not? Why is it that we can't understand Hashem? And there are a couple of stages to this, but the real answer, the one that I want to get to, is honestly, likely, probably not the one that most of you are thinking of. Okay, can't argue with that, because he does not want us to. Very good. That's a fact, 100%. But that's the reason why, that's the reason for the reason that we can't grasp Hashem. Because Hashem is so infinite and we are so finite. Good. It's hard to know whether that's saying what I was expecting people to say or whether it's saying what I'm going to say. That could go both ways. So good. But that's good. In a way, what I'm going to say is actually more simple. Sometimes it takes a whip. We can't understand any essence. Good. That's very deep. Etzem is built in Iskala would be the words in Chakira in Jewish philosophy. Very good. We can't understand our own essence either. Good. I like that. Correct. But that's still not what I'm getting at. The reason that we can't understand Hashem. And I chose my words carefully, again, like I did last time. We can't understand Hashem because Hashem is not information. Can you understand a desk? No, a desk is an object. You can understand how a desk works. You can understand the function of a desk. You can understand the physics of how it performs that function. You can understand the materials, the information. You can understand the nature of the materials that it's made from. You can understand the process, the nature of the process by means of which it's constructed. But you can't understand a desk. We understand information. Our brains store, process information, not objects. Our brains store information about objects. You can't understand a desk. You can understand everything there is to understand all the possible information that pertains to a desk, because our minds understand information, right? Our minds are created with a specific job description, and that job description is, there are actually a number of them. There's a lot of job descriptions, but in the context of thinking and information processing, our brains are, roughly speaking, and again, it's an oversimplification, but let's say our brains are designed to process and store information, right? Does that sound fair enough? Our brains process and store information. Our brains can process and store information about all kinds of things, but our brains can't process and store desks. Our brains can't process and store cups. Can process and store all the information there is that pertains to cups and desks, etc., 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 etc. So our brains can process and contain information. Our brains are able to understand and contain information about Hashem. Generally speaking, the closer it gets and the sort of more pure it gets, as we get closer and closer to the simple truth of Hashem, it gets more and more difficult because the ideas, the information that pertains to Hashem becomes more and more abstract, but it's still information. It's technically impossible to store Hashem in your brain for the simple reason that brains store information. Hashem's not information. The difference between a desk or a cup and Hashem is that you can hold the desk or the cup in your hand. You have a way to grasp it. You feel like grasping a cup, very simple. You hold it in your hand, you've got it. You want to grasp a table, you hold on to it, very simple. You want to grasp a piece of information, you learn it. It's now in your mind. So we can hold things in our hands, we can hold things in our arms, we can hold things in our minds. We can hold information in our minds. We have no way of grasping Hashem, not with our hands, not with our arms, not with our five senses, and not with our mind. Which is kind of sad. Because like, if you could choose the one thing that would be the ultimate, utmost valuable thing you could ever want to grasp, it would be Hashem. Halavai, we all felt that way, right? That we really would love to really be able to hold Hashem more than our family and our closest friends, etc. Halavai. But we can accept that that's the actual truth. And, you know, we're on a journey to try to appreciate it a bit more. I should speak for myself. I shouldn't be accusing everyone. But anyways, yeah. So, but ultimately, the thing that would be most valuable to be able to hold on to or grasp would be Hashem. And it's kind of sad. We have no way to do that. Can't grasp Hashem with our hands because Hashem is not an object. We can grasp objects with our hands. We can't sense Hashem with our five senses because Hashem is not a sound. Hashem's not visible. Hashem's not a smell. Hashem doesn't have a taste. Hashem's not tangible, so we can't feel him. That's all five senses. We can't grasp Hashem with our minds because Hashem's not information. So we're lost. You want to grasp Hashem? Bad luck. Sorry. But there's an exception. And that exception, actually, Hashem communicated in the first word of the Aseret Dibros. The first word of the Aseret Dibros is, anyone? Anochi, I. Now, Anochi, I'm going to write this in the chat to make it clear. Anochi is not a common Hebrew word that you would expect to see in the Torah for I, right? Usually it would say Ani, which is I. Why does it say Anochi? So Anochi is Rosh Hashanah. For, I know it takes me a little longer to type in Hebrew. Nafshi. Do one word. Ana. nafshi ksavis yehavis. See, anochi, those Rosh Hashanahs. It's left aligned, so it doesn't come out so nicely. But if you look at the first letter of those 4 words, you have anonafshi ksavis yehavis. It's anochi. Now, if you look at the way that this is explained in the Gemara and in Yaakov and places like that, literally what it means, the pshat of what it means in Yaakov is Hashem saying, Ano nafshi, I myself, Ksavis, wrote this in Yehavis and I'm giving it to you. I wrote this and I'm giving it to you myself. But if you translate the words, actually, it's very interesting because generally we think of like the way that Chassidus interprets things as being the less literal way. But it's not always. There are some times where the pshat is actually a non-literal translation. And the way that Chassidus interprets it, there are quite a number of ways that this happens, that this is the case, is actually the more literal way of translating it. Ana I, nafshi, my nefesh, my soul, my essence, my inside, Hashem says, Ksavis have written, Yehavis and placed, presented to you in these words. Hashem says, I have written and placed my soul inside these words. The first word of the Aseret Dibros is Hashem says, I'm giving you the Aseret Dibros. I'm giving you words. You know what words are? Words are something that you can store inside your brain. And I just want to say something that's fascinating to illustrate the extent to which this is true. Right? Let's say, for example, bodybuilding. Right? It doesn't have to be bodybuilding. I'll bring something that's probably more widespread, similar but a bit different. A person wants to build up endurance. We want our muscles to build up better endurance. We want to be more fit. We want our body to have the capacity to be able to run longer distances, to be able to, cope with more exercise, because we'll be more fit, we'll be more healthy. It'll increase our average life expectancy. It'll statistically increase our life expectancy. So what happens? The first day you go for a jog, if you haven't been exercising for a long time, the first day you try to go for a jog, it's brutal. It's painful. After 2 minutes, it's like you're crying. You keep pushing yourself. It's like 4 minutes and it's like, okay, that was pretty good. I did well. I get to go home and have a drink, right? You keep it up for 10 days. If you do it consistently every day, the progress you make from day 1 to day 10 is actually can be tremendous. If you really push yourself hard every day, the rate at which your endurance increases is incredible. It's incredible how effectively our bodies adapt. Now, there are a number of ways that happens because our body responds, right? Let's look at it in the muscles. The first day, after like 2 minutes, your muscles are burning. And then the next day, your muscles start burning at minute 5, and then minute 6 and 7 and 10 and 15 and 20 and 30. So what happens? When your body sees, okay, I needed to run 4 minutes today and I couldn't do it. I was barely able to and I barely made it. And really, maybe I was supposed to run 6 minutes, but I couldn't do it. And I ducked out at 4 and just wouldn't run anymore. So the way that Hashem designed the body is that the body understands that, gets the message and says, okay, we're going to now increase the endurance and strength of these muscles. We're going to build the muscles to be stronger so that next time they'll be able to reach the capacity that they were unable to reach today. And that's why with consistent exercise, our endurance builds up, our strength builds up, our ability to push ourselves builds up. And it happens not just in the muscles, it happens in the muscles, in our lungs, in our circulatory system, across the board. But the muscles are maybe the simplest to relate to and the most direct as a muscle. So what happens is our muscle density, whether a person's bodybuilding, then their muscles will actually get bigger. If a person just wants to get stronger, the muscles don't necessarily get bigger, but they get more toned, they get more dense, they get stronger. So the physical nature of the muscles actually changes because the body responds and says, well, this muscle is doing the physical work. And if the capacity of this muscle wasn't enough to facilitate the amount of work that needed to be done, we need to strengthen the muscle so it will be able to do more work next time. So it will be able to do what it needs to do. The brain's exactly the same thing. Now, a brain doesn't get any bigger, hopefully, it shouldn't be, but a person's brain can actually respond if a person consistently, on an ongoing basis is really pushing the limits of their academic ability and understanding things that are at the absolute limit of their ability to understand things, and memorizing things to the maximum of their ability, and it taking all the different academic skills, cognitive skills of the brain, and really pushing the limits. And the brain's like, I can't keep up. This is too much for me. The brain will actually create new neural connections. It won't grow outwards, but it will actually create new neural tissue inside and create new connections between neurons so that the brain will be better able to process information. So the brain will actually physically adapt to facilitate a greater processing and storage of information. Why? Because you can put sensors on a person's head and you can measure the activity in a person's brain when they're thinking, when they're recalling something, when they're storing something to memory, when they're trying to understand something. And you see the different parts of the brain where there's, electrical activity depending on what the person's doing. So we think of all the things we do, as being sort of abstract in its consciousness. It's the mind. But the mind lives in the brain. The brain is a physical organ which facilitates the activity of the mind. The same way that we wouldn't be able to see, right? When we see, we don't think of seeing, we generally, like, we know that we see with our eyes, but you don't think, when you're looking at something, you don't think, okay, there's the lens in my eye, there's the cornea, there's the aqueous humor and the vitreous humor and the retina and the optic nerve. You don't think of any of that. You just think of the thing you see. But if there was no eye or any of those things were missing, there would be no vision. It's the same thing with the brain. We think of just thinking, of thoughts, of ideas. But there's a very physical phenomenon that happens in the brain when we think and when we store information. When you learn something, if you have information today that you didn't know yesterday, there's a physical change in the brain, a molecular change in the brain that is the physical vehicle of that information that you've obtained. We don't think of it like that, but it is. It's very tangible. Information is literally physically stored in our brains. There's a literally, like, the electrical activity in the brain. We think even electricity can seem very vague. But if you look down at the level of the biochemistry, the electrical activity in the brain is just the movement of ions of potassium and sodium ions across a membrane. It's just physical movement of a physical entity. That's what that electrical activity is. So it sounds fancy and abstract in its energy, but that energetic activity is actually a physical movement of a physical entity. It's a very, very tangible, it's microscopic, it's complex, but it is a physical phenomenon. The storage, the processing and storage of information in the brain is a physical thing. Information is physically stored in your brain to the degree that if you push the limits of your brain to process and store information, the brain will actually create new connections to facilitate greater processing and storage of information, the same way that your muscles will grow and adapt. That's how real and physical the storage of information in your brain is. When you learn 1 + 1 = 2, if you didn't know that yesterday and you know it today, there is a physical change in your brain because that piece of information is physically, it exists in your brain. Now, exists in your brain in the form of some sort of molecular change, but it does exist in your brain. That's how your brain knows it and recalls it. So information, when you learn something, it physically exists in your brain. 1 + 1 = 2 is a piece of information that exists, is physically stored inside your brain, physically, in the form of molecules. And it doesn't matter what piece of information it is. Any information that you learn physically exists inside your brain, literally. Now, Hashem says, first word of the Aseret Dibros, Ano nafshi ksavis Yehavis. I have written and placed myself inside of these words. You learn Bereshis bara Elokim, that is information. You learn it, it's stored in your brain. That information has Hashem inside of it. Hashem has placed himself inside the information. Whatever that means, that's kind of vague and abstract, and that's another whole can of worms. And to be honest, I'm getting off easy by being able to say it's another whole can of worms, because I'm not even sure the degree to which I could explain that, because that's like, whoa, super abstract. But we can accept and acknowledge and understand that it's true, even if we don't really get a grip on how and what it means. Hashem exists inside this information. When you learn a halach in Shulchan Aruch, when you learn a line of Chassidus, when you learn a pasuk in Chumash, when you learn whatever it is If there's information in your brain now that wasn't there before, that's because that information physically exists literally inside your brain. And Hashem exists literally inside that information. So when we learn Torah, we literally are containing Hashem inside our brains, physically. That's pretty crazy if you think about it. So, are we all good now with what it means that Torah is a mashal for Hashem? Right? I think it should kind of make sense now. I'm going to summarize, don't worry. But when we say, no, this doesn't apply to mitzvahs at all, this is only Torah. This is Perek of Tanya. In Perek of Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe says, this is a different way of presenting it to what the Alter Rebbe says. But in Perek of Tanya, that Alter Rebbe is emphasizing the thing that Torah has that mitzvahs don't have. Torah also has that which mitzvahs have, because learning Torah is a mitzvah. But the ability to actually contain Hashem, we can't contain Hashem by doing mitzvahs. We can come into contact with Hashem, and it's really the opposite. We surround ourselves with Hashem. We become embraced by Hashem when we do mitzvahs, but we don't acquire Hashem inside of us. The only way to do that is to learn Torah. Because Torah is information which is stored physically in your brain. Hashem's inside that information. So when we say that Torah is a mashal for Hashem, it's very simple. Hashem is inaccessible by definition because we can't hold him, he's not an object. We can't understand him because he's not a piece of information. We can understand information. But because Hashem has placed himself inside of Torah, Torah is now the vehicle by means of which we can access and obtain that which it contains inside. The same way that a mashal is the vehicle by means of which you can access and obtain the information that's inside of it, that's integrated into it, which we wouldn't have been able to access directly, which is why the mashal was needed. Does that make sense? So Torah is a mashal. A mashal is, the idea of an analogy is an analogy for the relationship between Torah and Hashem. There is this idea that our connection to Hashem, the connection to Hashem that's limited to the time that we're learning Torah is the connection that we have through the speech. Right? And the Alter Rebbe talks about it in terms of mixing of breath, etc. The Alter Rebbe says that learning Torah is maybe equivalent to kissing Hashem. That's true, and that's lost. The actual direct interaction we have with Hashem when we learn, we don't have when we're not learning. But the acquisition of Hashem, the fact that Hashem is stored inside of our brains, as long as we remember the Torah, as long as that Torah is still in our brains, Hashem is still in our brains because Hashem is inside that idea. So there are multiple aspects of it. And here, that's another one, right? The mitzvah aspect of Torah is the same as the mitzvah aspect of any other mitzvah. So that we have. Whatever you have with mitzvahs, you also have when you learn Torah because it's a mitzvah to learn Torah. Then there's this interactive aspect that we have with Hashem when we learn Torah. That exists only while we're learning Torah. But the acquisition of Hashem, storing Hashem inside of our brains, that happens as long as the information's still in there. So Torah, the same way that a mashal is a tool, it's an accessory which allows you to grasp the ingraspable because it's integrated, it's inside of the mashal and you can grasp the mashal, so you get the nimshal through the mashal. Hashem is ingraspable, but we can understand information, we can understand psukim, we can understand halachas, and Hashem has placed himself inside of that. So when we acquire that information, we acquire Hashem along with it. Hashem says, I've placed myself inside of here. So when we learn Torah, we're literally physically storing Hashem in our brains. So when we're coming to Har Sinai, what's so exciting? We're coming to Har Sinai. When we get to Har Sinai, we are going to obtain, we're going to access a means a tool, an accessory by means of which we can literally store Hashem inside of our brains. That's like crazy. So the highlight of giving of the Torah of Har Sinai is basically our ability to access Hashem himself directly. Who are we inside? Our deepest identity. Deep, 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 deep down. Chelek Elokam Imal, part of Hashem. When we arrive at Har Sinai, right, each of us has our own personality and our own thoughts and our own everything. And that's why that you have one Jew, you have two shuls. You have 2 Jews, you have two Jews, you have 3 opinions. But that's because of our minds and our hearts. It's not because of who we are deep down inside, which is a part of Hashem, because there's only one Hashem. And Hashem doesn't have parts. It's not like we each got a different part of Hashem. The part of Hashem that's in us is identical. When we got to Har Sinai, why did we get to Har Sinai? We came to Har Sinai. Hashem was coming to present himself to us. So that part of us deep down inside, the part of Hashem within us was awakened and was like, whoa, yes. It's like it's so much in proximity to its source. It was awakened and it came out. We were all identical, right? Rashi doesn't say belev echad k'ish echad. There was a time when the Mitzrayim, it also says about the Mitzrayim when the Egyptians were chasing us, it says vayir doif, and he chased. It doesn't say they chased. So Rashi says the same thing that he says here, but he says the opposite. Belev echad k'ish echad. With one heart, like one person, because they had one heart, because they all had this common idea, this common objective of catching the Jews. They all wanted to get us so badly, they just ran together. They were united by the lev echad, by the common interest. Here it's the reverse. It says, K'ish echad, like one person, therefore belev echad, therefore we united and had a common interest and a common perspective, and there was no disagreement. Why? Because K'ish echad, because we are all K'ish echad. Who we are deepest down is identical. It's the layers built up on top of that where the variation begins. We are all identical deep down. And when we came to Matan Torah, we came to Har Sinai to get the Torah, to get Hashem. Hashem, you know, Hashem's presence was in the air. The Hashem, the part of Hashem within us was awakened by that and was like out in full force. And so we were all the same. We were all just one. It was K'ish echad, and because it was K'ish echad, it was belev echad. So now that's resolved, but why is it that all of a sudden, now the other question maybe gets stronger, right? It's like, why did Moshe not tell us to do anything? Because of the weakness, chulsha d'urcha, the weakness of the journey. It's like, what? First of all, we were super excited 7 weeks ago. Now we're here, it's in front of our face. Not only are we here, but like Hashem is in the air, so much so that the Hashem within us is coming out and awakened, and we're all one. Imagine what it takes, the force that it takes to get 2 million Jews to feel like one. How is it that if that happened, if the presence of Hashem in the air was strong enough that we all became united, how is it that we were like, sorry, no, can't prepare, we'll start tomorrow? It's not what he's saying at all. He doesn't say they were too tired to prepare and didn't want to prepare because they were tired from the journey. It says the weakness of the journey. There was, when we got there and experienced that Hashem that was in the air, all the outer parts of our personality faded away. Everything just receded into the background, and who we are just came bursting out, which is why there was this achdus. We were so overwhelmed by the presence of Hashem that was present, that was there when we arrived, because we got there and Hashem was preparing to present himself to us, to give himself to us inside of these words so that we could grasp him in our brains. Torah is about Hashem. You know, it's like there's a story about someone who asks a chassan, is like, you chassidim, you're all, you know, into this spirituality. What about Torah? You guys don't value Torah. And the chassid says to him, the Chabad chassid says, don't value Torah? You don't value Torah. Have you looked in Perek Hey of Tanya before? What, are you mad? And he says, I've learned Perek Hey of Tanya. That's all about Hashem. I'm not talking about Hashem. I'm talking about Torah. Right? Torah is about Hashem. That's the whole point. Torah is, Hashem's in Torah. That's why Torah is not valuable because of the academic experience. It is, don't get me wrong, but that's not the exciting thing about it. And if that's the part of Torah that gets someone excited, it's a good thing to be excited by that. It's better than not being excited at all, much better, because that's a stepping stone to get there. And if we keep learning it, you know, eventually the Ma'ar Shebay, the Hashem inside will shine and start to seep in and have an impact. But you know, the Hashem in the Torah is much more worth getting excited about than the academic pursuit. So we got there, and this was all about Hashem presenting himself to us. We arrived there, and the air's thick just with Hashem himself. And so we were so overwhelmed by the progress that we'd made, preparing ourselves, counting down, preparing the days, working through our every night of Sirah Emir, we're counting through the middays, refining and working on 1 minute at a time. And we get to Har Sinai, it's like we're almost done. We've had this journey, Urcha, this journey, journeying towards Matan Torah, preparing to experience Hashem himself. And we arrive at Har Sinai, and it's just like, whoa, Hashem, full force. We were so overwhelmed by that our sense of self disappeared. We needed a day. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to give us a day to just take in the experience of Hashem and really integrate that. And then on day 2, start allowing that presence and experiencing the presence of Hashem from day 1 to start to really power our preparations. But the preparations on day 2, 3, 4, 5 were like boom, and we were all in it 1,000% because we spent the first day integrating that experience of Hashem. There was no room for anything else. It's like you arrive, imagine you walk into a room and like you actually see Hashem, you're going to forget that you're even there. That's what Chulsha De'orcha means. It's the weakness in terms of sense of self, the weakness of self-awareness, the weakness of feeling our own independent identity. It was like there was none of that. We just felt Hashem. In terms of ourselves, completely weak. It was gone. It receded way in the background. That was gone. That was the weakness of the journey. Because of the journey and the progress that we made, our sense of self was weak. It was gone. It was decimated. It was just that Chelek Elokah, the part of Hashem within us that was really awakened and overtook everything that we were. And we were so overwhelmed by that and by the presence of Hashem. We needed time to integrate that so that we could get back to ourselves and actually start acting on it. So that's why it says on the first day, Moshe didn't tell us to do anything because of the weakness of the journey. Because of the weakness, we were so overwhelmed by that. We needed time to just really be in the moment and experience it and then integrate it. And then we could start utilizing that experience and allowing that to power our preparations. And both of these things, the fact that it was so overwhelming that we needed time to just really adapt and process and integrate, is the same reason that we were all one. It's because it was just like, the only 2 things that existed when we arrived at Har Sinai was Hashem and the part of Hashem in us. Everything else was wiped out of the picture of the story. So obviously we were all one because there's only one part of Hashem. It's the same thing that's in all of us. It's identical. And there were no preparation. It was just like, whoa, overwhelmed, process, integrate, then we can prepare. And all of that was the case because this whole idea was about Hashem presenting himself to us. That's what this was about. That's what Matan Torah was. Right? It says in a midrash that Hashem says by Matan Torah, Hashem says that when you take the Torah, Osi atem loichim, you are taking me. You obtain Torah, you obtain me. I've placed myself inside of Torah. That's what we're celebrating on Matan Torah. On Matan Torah Shavuos, we're celebrating the fact that as a result of Hashem presenting himself to us inside the information of Torah, inside the ideas of Torah, inside the words of Torah, we can literally physically store Hashem inside our brains every time we learn Torah. And I'd say that's pretty well worth being excited about. Questions? You're welcome to put in questions. I'm just going to tie up and then we'll see if there's any questions after I'm done. I want to wish everyone a good Yom Tov and Kabbalah Sator B'Simcha B'Pnimius. May we all renew our relationship with Torah in a very deep and personal way and with joy, because all good things should be done with joy. Now, just the fine print, in case people are struggling with that, that doesn't mean that if someone's having a hard time with joy, it means they're not doing the good things properly. That's 2 different things. But good things, it makes sense, obviously, to be joyous about something good. And if a person, and a person should never feel guilty about enjoying Torah and mitzvahs, chas v'shalom. It's an amazing thing, and amazing things should be enjoyed, and it should be done with joy. That shouldn't be our motivation. We shouldn't do it because of the joy it brings us. We should do it because it's the right thing to do, and it's because Hashem wants, and it makes a dir b'tachtonim. But it's a good thing to enjoy. Hashem wants us to do it. If Ivdu Hashem b'simcha, serve Hashem with simcha, receive the Torah. We should, on Shavuos, Hashem will be presenting it to us again. Hashem will once again be presenting himself to us in these words. And if Hashem is doing it again, it's because he's not doing the same thing he did last time. That would be a waste of time. He's doing it more. Hashem is presenting himself, investing himself inside of the Torah even more than before, making himself more accessible and more directly accessible to us than ever before. And we should really embrace that and renew and deepen and strengthen our relationship with Torah, b'pnimius, deeply, personally, and b'simcha, with joy. Good Yom Tov.
Thank you so much, GLICK. Thank you for taking us on that amazing journey. It was definitely a journey, and I
hope the journey didn't leave you too weak.
You tied it in beautifully, so thank you very, 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 very much. And now we all have we have amazing inspiration to take us into Shavuos. So thank you for your time and your amazing wisdom.
Thank you. It's Hashem's wisdom, not mine, but I'm glad to have the honor and privilege of being involved in sharing it and making it maybe more accessible. So I don't know if you want to continue this. I'm going to duck out. I will see you. Have a good Yom Tov, and see you all next time, whenever that is.
Yes, amen. Thank you. Good Yom Tov.
Yom Tov.